Hello and welcome to another episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Janine Luby. And as I'm starting August, this is we've been last week we had Dr. Leonard, Katie Leonard of Johnson College, president of the Johnson College, and we had a great conversation about changing people's minds about schools that really are heavily involved with promoting trades. Of course, they're doing much more there now, trying to get more women in predominantly male roles and also vice versa, some more male students into predominantly female roles. Careers. So that was a great conversation. In August, I'm going to continue with kind of that theme. We're getting back to school. We're getting in that mindset of back to school. So today's topic is actually going to be, normally I like to have a little bit of humor and a lot of laughs sprinkled throughout. This is going to be a change in that it's going to be a very serious topic. So we might have a couple of laughs in the beginning where we're just talking about to each other, but as we get into the topic, it will be more serious. So I just want to give you that heads up. And I know it's a very important topic. We're going to be talking about school shootings, school safety. And obviously that is a really important topic that is not something to be taken lightly at all. So before I actually introduce my guests, I always like to say how I know people, because I just think it's not to say, oh, look at me and who I know. That's not it at all. But just how I think it's so important that we take opportunities to meet people, to try new things. And you never know how these people are going to return in your life somehow. And you're going to be connected, how you might be able to help one another out, just show up for, each other in different ways. So today's guest, I have Amy Archer, and Amy and I met in 2012. Actually, I don't know that we actually physically met, but I remember seeing her on stage. We both did the Scranton Story Slam, the very first one, which I'm pretty proud that I was part of that. It was really fun. 2012, which feels like forever ago. And I didn't have the aches and pains that I have now as I hit 50. And I felt much more vivacious then. But I remember us doing that. And it was warning signs was the theme. And Amy actually won with her very humorous story. She talked, I remember, about Weight Watchers, and she has a memoir out called Fat Girl Skinny. And like I said, she's been a writer. She's a mom. She was a writing coordinator at the University of Scranton, and she just accepted a new position, actually. So she can correct me, therapist.com. She's the head writer and editor. And what we want to talk about today, like I said, we're going to take a serious turn, is her involvement on a really important book called If I Don't Make It, I Love You. It's survivors in the aftermath of school shooting. So enough of my talk. And I'd like to thank my guest for joining me and welcome Amy Archer. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. And I am going to correct you. I'm a senior writer at
I'm sorry. Yes. I knew I didn't get it quite right. So
I have a brilliant editor-in-chief over me, and I just don't want to sideline her.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. So you're senior writer at therapist.com. Okay. Mm-hmm. And before we get into the topic for the day, so what is therapist.com about? Because I'm curious.
Yeah, so therapist.com is a website where clinicians and therapists can list their practice, and our goal is to connect people with therapy and to make therapy and mental health resources more accessible for everyone. So there's going to be some articles on there. There will be some what we're calling pillar pieces. So like, what is ADHD? And then, everything is sort of vetted by different mental health professionals. And that's, our tagline is where hope meets help. And I think that's a great summary of what we do. And it's backed by, I don't know if you're familiar with PESI, but PESI has been providing continuing education to beyond the counseling field, but mostly in the counseling field for 40 years. So this is their new venture, and I'm really, really proud to be part of it.
That's wonderful. And it's something, I think it ties in with today's topic too. Mental health is a piece of, it's a piece of pretty much everything. It's a piece of our overall health. It is health, and it is so important. So no, that sounds absolutely vital and wonderful. So congratulations on your role. That's got to be rewarding work. It's nice when you're doing something that you feel you can actually make an impact, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really interesting how I got here, because I left education to come here, but it was sort of like I had been building towards this ever since I started working on the book with the gun violence survivors, I've been really, really interested in mental health and trauma and PTSD. So I've been kind of writing about those things, and then all the stars aligned and just kind of brought me here. And I'm very grateful to be here.
I love hearing stories like that because sometimes we get impatient in life. I'm not saying you, but me, like younger people, myself through the years.
Yeah.
But you sometimes don't realize how things are actually gelling, and then you're like, "Wow,
Yeah.
here I am." So that's wonderful. So let's get into. I do want to talk about how you got drawn to that project,
Mm-hmm.
but also I want to mention too to our listeners that you are a mom yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, school security and school safety and children's health and wellness, their safety is a factor. It is important to all of us in the community. But obviously, I can't tell you that I feel exactly 100% the same as someone who's not a mom because I'm not. I don't have those fears. I don't have worries as much, because I
Sure.
don't have a child. So you do, though. So as a mom, so I don't know, wherever you want to start, if you want to just tell me first what got you into the project, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it means to you as a mom, as a, your background as an educator, and all those different facets that you brought to the project.
Sure. So one thing I do want to say, and I appreciate that kind of introduction, but I do want to say that gun violence doesn't only affect parents. Like, even though you don't have children that you have to send to school, you still probably have to worry in the back of your mind when you're in a grocery store, if you're going to a concert, if you're going to a shopping mall. This is kind of, that fear is pervasive and it goes beyond parenting. But you're right. And I do appreciate that there is this extra level when you're now sending your children to school, which is supposed to be the most sacred of all places. So I do acknowledge that. So my girls, I have twins, and they were 6 when Sandy Hook happened. So I was drawn to the gun violence prevention movement. After that, I joined Moms Demand Action. I've been, kind of, I was active with them for, 5, 6, 7 years. And then it just kept happening. And I was so changed by that day. Like, I just couldn't let it go. And I didn't understand because I don't think they were calling it this yet. But us as a nation, as parents, we really have suffered some vicarious trauma through these events. Like, there is this inclination, I think, in people to want to avoid being voyeuristic. Like, oh, I shouldn't be upset over Sandy Hook because my kids weren't there. But, if you're a citizen and you're a human being, of course you should be empathetic and grieve for those children and have empathy for the parents. So I think we were all kind of swept up in this collective trauma, and we didn't know how to name it or what to do with it. And then you had people like Shannon Watts who were going out and starting Moms Demand, and a lot of moms and just women in the community and men were drawn to that as parents. So I think I just realized at some point that I needed to do something more, and I needed to use my writing to help. So I was talking with my co-editor, Lauren Kleiman, and we were talking about our next project because we had done an anthology together on body image. And we enjoyed working together. Like, we found we worked well together. And yourself, when you're in the arts, that's rare. So we were like, oh, let's do something else together. So I had said to her, well, I'm doing something on gun violence, like, period. So she was very interested in it. And we decided to start. So with the help of some of my friends in the Moms Demand Action group, I was able to not break into, but kind of ease my way into this very sacred space of survivors of these shootings, and begin to work with them and earn their trust and help them to tell their stories. So in the end, and I think we were only a month into the project when Parkland happened. So that kind of reaffirmed what we were doing. And in the end, we have, I think, over 80 stories. There's 70 in the book, and then we have a bunch on a digital archive on our website. And so I think there's like 72 in the book, firsthand stories, and they span 52 years and 26 different communities. Oh, wow. So we start with the very first story in the book is from Santa Fe, Texas, and that shooting happened in May of 2018, I want to say. I apologize if I get some of these dates wrong. I have so many dates in my head.
Oh, that's fine.
In my head for this. and I worked with Rhonda Hart. Her daughter Kimberly was murdered at Santa Fe School in her art classroom. Rhonda had just had this happen and was not able to write for us. So with her permission, I used her tweets and I made a visual story. So like some, not all of these stories are written. Some are interviews, some are visual, but the majority of them are narratives. So that's the first story you have in the book. And then it goes all the way back to the University of Texas Austin tower shooting in I'm going to get this one wrong. 51, 52, something like that. I'm not sure. I apologize. 1960 maybe. Anyway, so the 1966, that's what the University of Texas tower shooting. So we have survivors from there and everything in between. Columbine, the shootings that happened around Columbine that no one seems to know about, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook. So it took us 2 years. The book came out in September of 2019 and it's coming out in paperback this October.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that's what drew me to it.
Yeah. What's interesting, and you say that, that one is 1966. When we think of school shootings, we think more recent, right? So
Yeah.
I was, I wouldn't have even, obviously it's silly to think, obviously we've had crime for, the
Sure.
longest time, but
Sure.
you don't think of school shootings having taken place that long ago. At least we're not, we're focused on what's happening now because it seems to be increasing. But
Right.
yeah, I wouldn't even have thought that it was spanned back that far. And obviously it's the same trauma, the same horrible result when that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just grabbed my copy to double check. It is August 1st, 1966 was the University of Texas shooting. And then Santa Fe was May 2018. So all those in between. And I'm telling you, Janine, I could fill 6 more books. Like I considered myself pretty like well researched on school shootings with all of my advocacy work. There were so many that I had not even heard of. Had no idea that they happened. So this is something that a lot of people associate Columbine with the first shooting, and it really wasn't. There were a bunch leading up to Columbine that were very similar. They were in suburban white America, perpetrated by young white men. So very similar blueprint to kind of what has been happening, but we didn't really know about it, maybe because we didn't have the 24-hour news cycle.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree. I mean, now everything is, well, and it's almost reliving the trauma. I think in some cases it's so much, I mean, it's good to be informed, but at the same time, it's like, and like you said, Columbine, we remember that one, but we don't even know about the other, the ones that aren't reported or don't become the it story or whatever. You mentioned something, and I don't want to get off topic, but you mentioned something that I'm one of these people that screams at the TV. Like I talk to the TV when the news is on and everything.
Yep.
And the one thing that I don't feel that it's covered really well, and maybe I've missed it. I don't know. You've been in it in the advocacy group, so maybe you've seen it. This idea of, like you said, the blueprint. I notice even not just school shootings, but violence against women and different places, like with the incels, it seems to be a lot of like angry young white men. And even not just young, but then you get into 30s, 40s, it's a lot of like these angry white men. I have not seen that topic addressed well enough because, I mean, we want to talk prevention. It's like, what is going on with these men? That's, this is how they're showing their emotions or how they're dealing with things or whatever. I don't know. Have you seen this covered at all or talked about or addressed in some fashion?
It's talked about a lot in the gun violence prevention circles. There's, it's hard to talk about what's happening without getting political. And unfortunately, that's where it usually devolves into. So, I don't currently think there's much productive talk around it, but I do think that we're aware of it. It's obvious. I just don't think communities know what to do about it. And I think it's a much larger picture. Violence against women is a horrific crime that's been happening for centuries, and we just don't know how to deal with it. I think I come from the viewpoint of making it harder to get a gun is always better. If you are a responsible, law-abiding gun owner, like my husband is, like my father-in-law is, like many in my community are hunters, then you should have your gun, no problem. But if you are somebody who's beaten up your wife, who, has a felony on your record, you should not be able to get one. And I think those are some of the laws that we see passing now, these red flag laws. Like, if you've perpetrated violence against a woman in your life, you're not going to get a gun. Or if you have some kind of violent criminal act on your record, you will not get a gun. So things like that, I think, are a good first step. But, obviously you look at some of these shooters and they don't have a record, or they've never done anything wrong, which was the case in Columbine. Like they were what we would consider today probably like juvenile delinquents, you know what I mean? But they weren't criminals. And I can't tell you how many times when I was researching these shootings, it's always the parent's gun. 9 times out of 10, it's the parent's gun. So do we start there? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but it's definitely, I think you'll hear a lot of people talking about mental health, investing in mental health. I think that's really important. I think the new gun violence prevention bill that is being passed through Congress right now, that was signed by the president, I think that throws a buttload of money at mental health. I hope. So we'll see. I mean, I'm not somebody who sits here and thinks it's only the guns, right? It's definitely mental health. It's definitely a social issue. It's definitely, but America has we have the most guns when we arm these people until we can figure it out. And that's, I think, where the problem is. So I think, if you look at the kids who became activists after Parkland, we call them the Parkland kids, but they're not kids anymore. They are doing great things by pulling both sides to the table, having rational, non-political conversations, and talking about how we're all going to come together and solve this. And I think that's kind of what we have to do. But yes, identifying that we have a problem with angry young white men in this country is definitely on a lot of people's radar.
Yeah. I mean, I watch like even some of the things, the documentaries on Netflix, and I taught for about 7 years part-time at King's.
Yeah.
And it was one of my students who told me about these incels. And I'm like,
Yep.
oh my God, it was like an HBO special. I'm like, I'd never heard this term. And
Yeah.
it's upsetting, I mean, hatred for any group is, horrible.
Mhm.
But you take personally what is to you, I'm a woman. So to see these
Yeah.
young men like that are just, kind of coming together over a hatred for women
Yep.
and like seeing the men who go out and perpetrate violence against women as their heroes. It's very disturbing. So yeah, that's we do need to I mean, start somewhere. And you mentioned the Parkland kids, so to speak. If they can bring people together and they are young and they have the energy, I mean,
Mhm.
we need that. We absolutely do. Like you said, unfortunately, these conversations devolve into the politics. It's
Yeah.
a shame that that's what has to derail. Because I always like to say that, I'm friends with people who vote for the other party, so to speak. And
Mhm.
I think the bottom line is we agree on so much more than we disagree on. I think if we could just stop and think about that, like, do we all have people in our lives we care about and love? Of course. Do
Right.
we all have, we have to make a living and bills to pay? Of course. We all want a good quality of life to enjoy our weekends, our vacations, our time with, of course we agree on so many of those things
Sure.
that we value. It's too bad that the politics absolutely gets us sometimes nowhere in the way, right?
Yeah, it really does. It really does. I always make sort of a half-hearted joke that I wish I didn't know who my neighbors were. Like, I wish I didn't know this neighbor XYZ down the road, votes for this person. Like, I don't need to know that. If I visit your shop and you're cool and we get along, or you're my neighbor and we both love our kids and send them to school and do this and do that, I don't need to know your politics. Like, I wish I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And it used to be that way, right? I know when
Yeah.
I used to date, it was like,
Hmm.
or even with family, oh my gosh. And, this is a lighthearted thing, going to my my relatives at Thanksgiving and everything. And I loved my uncle so dearly.
Mhm.
And we had opposing viewpoints, but we did it in a way
Yeah.
that we come together after several glasses of wine and still love each other. And we'd get
Yeah.
it, we'd have it out. He'd harass me for my views and I'd harass him a
Hmm.
little, poke fun. But otherwise we, you'd say, don't talk about religion and politics. Now it's like everyone has to kind of almost put it in your face. And like, I think it is
Yeah.
taking away from that identity of like, we're humans, we're neighbors, we're
Yeah.
community members. I will say one and I don't like to get into that stuff with the business, but when you put it in my face and I'm at your business and you're wearing that t-shirt,
Yep.
that Let's Go Brandon t-shirt,
Yeah.
you're letting me know something that you want to let me know. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, I can get bagels somewhere else. I
Yeah.
mean, it's
Yeah.
like,
Exactly.
because there's so many, I mean, is that really important? Is that you
Yeah.
have to put that shirt on this morning instead of wearing what every other employee is wearing, which is the bagel store logo? I mean,
It
come on.
boggles my mind that business owners do that for either side.
Yes,
Like
exactly.
you're automatically alienating a large portion of your customer base.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weird.
And it's not necessary, right? Because it's
Mm-mm.
like if you have a business and it's doing well, you're
Mhm.
doing a good job there, people
Mhm.
enjoy, they're coming in, they're buying. Why do you have to show us your
Yeah.
politics? And again,
Yeah.
it's not like we have to agree. Like I was fine until then. I'm like, you made a choice to do
Mhm.
this today
Mhm.
when all your employees are wearing the logo shirts.
Yep.
So now I'm kind of annoyed. But I mean, I didn't care before then. I don't care if we don't have to
Right.
agree at
Right.
all. And like you said,
Yeah.
on either side, I just don't think it has to be there. But I don't want to get off topic. So I wanted to ask you, so with all these stories, these great stories, I don't mean great, I mean valuable stories.
Mhm.
Uh, what would you say was either like, well, two questions really, a common thread that you saw, if you did
Mhm.
find one,
Mhm.
and what you felt you learned, like you walked away from the project having learned.
I learned so much. I mean, it was a year and a half that nearly broke me in some ways, but also lifted me in some ways too. Like it was just when I at the culmination of the book, so it came out in September 2019, and in December of 2019, for the 7th anniversary Sandy Hook, I went up to Newtown and I had the pleasure of reading with several of the survivors in the book, and I was introducing them, and I was like, this is what everything has brought me to. You know what I mean? Like there I was crying on my couch for a week in 2012, and here I am introducing these people and letting them tell their stories to a community. Like it was just such a wild journey for me. And I just think if I've learned anything good, that it was to, I guess, the power of the story. So I meet so many people. I've toured with this book, I've traveled and spoken in front of a lot of groups with this book, I've cried with so many groups while I was reading from this story, or from this book while I was reading survivor stories, and I just treat them as something so sacred that I hold and I share with people. And when I share these stories, it's hard for people to forget it. It's hard for people to turn away and to close off to something. So, I went into this project, and I remember when I was talking to the survivors very early on and I was kind of pitching this to them, I said to them, it's my hope, and it still is my hope, that someday our grandchildren will read this book like we read The Diary of Anne Frank, like an insight into some horrific tragedy that we've learned from and have moved past. And that's my hope. And I guess I'm just so moved by first person narratives that, this really kind of solidified how important they are. Um, I've seen a lot of common threads, mainly around. So my co-editor and I split up the book in that I worked with K through 12 and she worked with colleges and universities. For the most part, there were some exceptions, but for the most part, that's what we did. And I saw, because I was also sort of the same age as the Columbine kids when that happened. So I just feel like I was kind of parallel to them in a lot of ways. And when I went back, I saw so many people from that time. There's 4 or 5 shootings right in a cluster of like 4 or 5 years there in the 90s that just, they were so haunted by their trauma, and they had no resources and no help and no name for it. And it was very, I remember in Heath High School, which happened in Kentucky, and I want to get that year right. It was right before, hold on, I apologize. It was 97, December 1st, 1997, Heath High School. Survivors there telling me that, they called the community in to like scrub the blood off of the floors and the walls and put the school back together and come back to school like the next day. Because the principal was like, we just got to keep going. We got to keep going. And that was, if you think about the mindset, like in the 90s, that's kind of what it was. It was this like, we don't have time to sit around, feel things. Like we need to just keep going. So I think we've done those survivors a real disservice as a community because they had no resources. And so many of them turned to drugs and alcohol and toxic relationships and, have mental health issues. And have, some have thrived in spite of having no resources. But I feel like now, thankfully, I wish this wasn't still a problem that we have to address, but luckily, we have started to pay attention to mental health and to the needs of the survivors. And we have started to provide them resources. Still not enough, but you see what's going on in Washington. We can't even get people to vote for rights for veterans. So I don't know how we're going to get these survivors what they need, but they need a lot more than they're getting. They're getting some mental health resources sent right to the site. They're getting, stuff like that. But a lot of these people are living with injuries still to this day from their shootings and stuff and have to worry about getting health care. So I think, if there's one thread that I've seen throughout, it's that we're not doing enough for these people. We're asking them every day by walking into a school to take their life into their own hands because we cannot give up the idea of everybody having a gun in this country, yet we don't want to help them. And it's very similar to what's happening with the veterans right now.
It's frustrating. I mean, that's really frustrating. And we talked a little bit before. It's not just you're someone that's not, it's not just the guns. It's a lot of different issues. But what, if you feel comfortable sharing your opinion, where do you think it has to be this kind of combination of a variety of things, like, more mental health resources, like you said, what can we do prevention wise? I mean, I mentioned to you off before we recorded, and you had said you hadn't heard about it. I just thought it was interesting. Before I got online to record with you, I just heard about another book that's out there now about school shooting. I shouldn't say about school shootings, about school security, right? So there's a Scranton police officer, a former police officer who has a book out now that's it's called The Risk Assessment Blueprint. It's school security. And I caught a little bit of his interview a couple weeks ago. It was on with Nikki Stone. I just listened for a few minutes, and he was saying more or less that there needs to be more training of, he doesn't believe in active shooter training with kids because Nikki had said, that's brought up that could be traumatizing for the kids. And he said he agrees that it should be more with the law enforcement needs the more training. And he said they need to be trained more mentally because he says the body can't go where the mind doesn't. And he said they have to be prepared to take this on. And he also talked about identifying problems in the classroom with, certain children, and being prepared in that way. So, that's just what I picked up from before. So we know it's not a simple answer, obviously, right? What do you, in your opinion, as someone who's researched, who's been in advocacy groups, who's a mother, what's your hope, or what would you like to see going forward?
I think it is a combination of things, but I think until we figure that out, like it's so hard to just say, we have a problem with toxic masculinity in this country and we have to change that, or we're radicalizing young white boys. How do you change that overnight? You can't. Or, we have a problem with, I don't know, people say this all the time, violent video games. I don't believe in that, but whatever. Like if you did consider that was a problem, okay, or something like that. These things are social systemic issues that will take decades to change. So in the meantime, let's just make it harder for those people to get a gun. Like that's how I feel. I think we should ban assault weapons. I think, when it was funny because Lauren and I went up to Woodstock, New York for a weekend and locked ourselves into this farmhouse that was donated generously to us from a patron. And we had to do this major editing on the book. Our editor was like, it's 30,000 words too long. So, you have to make some tough decisions there. But I remember like listing on a storyboard, like all the shootings. And there's this period of time where like it just drops dramatically. And you can't help but visually see that was when we had the assault weapons ban after Columbine. And then it lapsed with George W. Bush in 2004. And there is this like breathing space. Like, were there mass shootings in that? I believe there was some, of course, but the number of them had declined just so much. So it was really interesting to see that visually. I will say this about police. I've not read this gentleman's book. I don't know who he is, so I can't speak to that. But I will say the idea that the folks who are in the gun violence prevention movement being antithetical to the police is really, it's just not right. It's not correct, because when you think about it, gun violence is a police issue as well. I feel all the time that we do our policemen and our first responders such a disservice by asking them to show up to these calls where it's a domestic dispute and 9 times out of 10 there's going to be a gun on the scene. Like, these people have to put their lives in so much more danger than is necessary, and I just feel bad for them. And a lot of times, Uvalde was something totally different. But a lot of times if you have a young cop and they make a mistake, it's because they're terrified. And I don't blame them. Like, you can only train somebody so much to walk into a room with somebody with an AR-15 or, whatever. So I do think that, and police communities that I've spoken with do think there needs to be something done here, because they're facing this on the front lines. And we're not asking them to be soldiers and to go into war zones. We're asking them to be community police officers. Those two things should be different, but they're not in this country because everybody's armed so heavily. So I tend to just kind of listen to what police say, because they deal with this stuff all the time. And have there been mistakes made? Of course. But I personally don't think, and I'm not saying that this gentleman is advocating this in any way. I have not read the book, so I don't know. But sometimes you will hear out of the policing community, more guns in schools. I don't think that's the answer. I think we can't put that on teachers. We just really can't. I've been a teacher. I taught at the college level. I haven't taught K through 12, but I could tell you, as a mother of 2 kids who've gone through K through 12 system, those teachers have enough on their plates. They don't need to be marksmen now with weapons. So I think, it's a combination of a bunch of things. But in the meantime, we need to stop arming people who shouldn't have guns.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly what you said. And I agree with you about, teachers certainly do have enough on their plates, although I will say that having those plans and knowing what to do is important, because I will say, and this is not to take away from King's, but when I did teach there, again, I was part-time. There really wasn't much of a plan as to, because I was teaching in rooms where there was only one way in and one way out.
Yeah.
On the corner, in the corner of the building, the second floor. And sometimes I would think, and like to your point earlier, that I don't have children, but it has crossed my mind, because
Sure, of
teaching
course.
here at King's, I thought, what if a student is disgruntled, or what
Yeah.
if someone comes in from the community? I would teach in this corner room, and I'm like, there's really no way out, honestly, because we
No.
couldn't really jump from the 4th floor there. And like, so being prepared, I think, is important, and communication, as always. I'm
Yes.
a big proponent of any kind of communication, because that's when I think all kinds of issues happen. But yeah, so it is good to be prepared, but like you said, not to put that burden of having more guns, that would not help, I don't think.
I remember when we started doing active shooter training at the university, I refused to participate because I was like, I'm not normalizing this. I'm not letting this happen. And then I realized, like, I'm doing such a disservice to my students if I don't learn what to do if this happens. So I do think teachers and staff absolutely need to know what to do in these situations. And there's some really good research out there that is starting to show that I hate even saying this sentence, but that the casualties have been lower because of some of the precautions taken. There should be no casualties, but I do think, the schools have a responsibility to invest in certain security protocol, like doors that lock, whatever they need to do. But the answer is 100% not arming teachers. Number one, teachers are a helping profession. They're there to help people. They are not equipped mentally, emotionally, and physically to take someone's life. I mean, if they have to, sure they will, but shooting someone is a big deal. I mean, I don't know if I could do it. So it's really, it's burdensome to ask them to do that and not, and if they want to put money in schools for counselors, that's a good thing. Teaching your children and talking with your children about signs to, almost all of these recent shooters have had a blueprint on social media somewhere. So paying attention to that stuff, telling your parents about that stuff, talking to your kids about what to watch for, I think is important. Those are the things we can do, but I don't know what the answer is. And I just wish people would stop screaming at each other and just kind of come together and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, like I was mentioning that other gentleman, I'm not sure if he talks about that at all. I just heard parts of his interview.
Right. Yeah.
And I do believe because Nikki Stone had asked him about Uvalde, and his answer to that was that he felt they were not mentally prepared or trained properly in that sense to be prepared, because he said it's not just the body that has to be prepared, it was the mind. And he also did bring up budgets. He said schools are not investing enough in security, basically, or arming, protecting the school, the students well enough. But again, to your point, we need to be listening to one another, having conversations, listening. It's tough. Though you brought up a good point too about social media. And I think that sometimes that's even more frustrating when the signs are there, when the young people are posting that they're literally going to do this, and then it happens. And I don't think that has an easy answer either, other than, like you said, watching for it, reporting posts like that. Although I think in some cases it's even more frustrating that some of these gentlemen were on people's radar, and it still happened. So I guess the answer is just keep being vigilant and reporting things that look like that, suspicious or frightening. Yeah.
It's the internet is a dark, vast web of unknown things.
Yeah.
And, most of these people are leaving some kind of blueprint. I mean, even Dylan and Eric did in Columbine. They were on like AOL chat rooms or something, leaving blueprints. Like, it's there. It's just who's seeing it and are we taking it seriously? We also don't want to get into Minority Report territory where we're like arresting people on pre-crime, right? So like what is that line? And it's a very delicate, it's not illegal to say you hate people on social media, but I guess if you're making threats, then that's something that can be acted upon.
Yeah. And I know when I taught, I think it was social media course, I forget the law, but what you said is more or less exactly right. Like, you can't, I mean, we have freedom of speech, but if you say, I'm going to go to a certain place at a certain time and I'm threatening, that's a specific threat. And that's reportable. But and that brings up that could be a whole different conversation. The internet, my gosh, policing the internet is such, I'm watching these documentaries and I think I need to stop. I just watched the other day about Hunter Moore, and I thought, how did I get through life? I had never even heard this guy, but basically making money off of, hacking into accounts, having people hack into accounts and posting nudes of women. They were traumatized because they did not, allow this. And I'm thinking, and it's so hard. The FBI had to build this case. It took 2 years and he still didn't get enough time or enough fine, as far as I'm concerned, because of the lives that were destroyed. But it's such policing the internet is its own animal.
It's a whole new space. And the thing is, we have to start treating Facebook, Twitter, and social media like a public space. And how would we regulate that? That's my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you look at some people's posts, I think they sometimes forget, right? It is a public
We can
space.
see you.
Hi. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you, so what, as a mother then, how have you talked to your children, your daughters, right? You have twin daughters. How have you talked to them, and how do you talk to them now? And I mean, it is terrible that would have to be a conversation like, okay,
Yeah.
let's get back to school clothes and let's talk about safety. But I mean, it's realistic because that's where we're at right now. What
Yeah.
do you say to your daughters, and what's some kind of conversations that you have?
It's really hard because I don't know if I'm doing it right, obviously. I've made a devil's bargain to kind of play the odds game and to assure them that the odds of being in a mass shooting are very, very slim. And so they should not live in fear. But you weigh that against it could happen. It happens in many communities in many different spaces. And if I tell them not to live in fear, are they going to be prepared? But do I want to over prepare them and then they live in fear? It's a shell game. So I have kind of just said to them, what I said to you, like watching social media, watching for signs. If you see something somebody's saying, if you notice somebody's being kind of ostracized or bullied, let's draw attention to that. Now, I will say that in the 90s, especially after Columbine, there was this idea that, the outsider, right? Like the kids that were bullied and made fun of. That, number one, is not really true. Eric and Dylan were kind of popular at Columbine amongst their group. They weren't gonna win like homecoming king, but they had a group of friends and they were popular within that group, and a lot of these other shooters as well. So that's not really borne out in evidence, but also, it's kind of like this generation, I just don't see that kind of, they're very inclusive. My girls, I hear from them all the time that, like, okay, so I have this podcast, Gen X, This Is Why, where my sister and I are watching Gen X stuff that we grew up with and talking about like how crazy it was, right? So we're watching Little House on the Prairie, and I'm watching this episode last night where Nancy, Nellie's replacement, Nancy, is clearly making fun of this fat kid, and they're calling him fat and they're calling him blubber and my daughters are like appalled by this. They are like, nobody talks that way, mom. No one talks that way at our school. No one, I'm not saying it's like kumbaya, everybody gets along, but it's much more inclusive than we're seeing. So that gives me hope. And maybe we in these younger generations will see these numbers start to fall. I don't know, but I've chosen in the meantime to talk to my kids about just themselves being inclusive, being vigilant, being aware. I have not spoken to them about what to do if it actually happens. I'm hoping their teachers will have that conversation with them. I can't bring myself to do it because I just know too much, and I can't. The details that I have learned from interviewing 30 or 40 of these survivors are, it's like, I call it kind of like, it's almost like throwing a fireball at somebody. Like, I'm just going to keep these things inside of me so that no one else has to hear them. And I don't know if I could have a conversation with them about what to do in the moment. So I talk more prevention, more calming fears, more, that kind of route. But when I'm dropping them off somewhere, I'm always looking for second exits. But however, when they were smaller, I know I'm talking in a circle here, I'm sorry. When they were smaller, I do remember saying to them, always look for that second exit. And it was after the Aurora shooting in Colorado. Always look for the second exit, but I always couched it under fire prevention. It's just safe to know where the exits are at all times in case you have to get out of a place, blah, blah, blah. So when they were a little smaller, I used to kind of to hide it under that category. But I don't know what the right thing to do is in terms of how to talk to our kids. That's one of the reasons why I'm so thrilled to be in the role that I'm in, because I'm interviewing so many therapists, so many clinicians, so many people who are experts in this and can kind of disseminate that information through me to the public, right? So that's kind of my hope for this, is those questions that parents are Googling in the middle of the night, like, how do I talk to my kids about Uvalde? Hopefully they can find answers.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure absolutely, I don't think I need to be a parent to know that I am certain you're not alone, because I
Yeah.
have most of my friends are parents, and it's that question of, am I doing the right thing? I'm sure
Yeah.
that you are certainly not alone in that. And everyone has to do what they feel is right, because you can't, I mean, you're doing what you feel is best.
Yep.
But like you said, talking to the professionals, the mental health professionals, that's great that you're putting out information that can be useful and valuable, so that it could be solutions and answers for parents who are wondering how to handle it. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I will tell you that we're in Pennsylvania. We have an election coming up. One thing that scares me about our governor candidate, Mastriano, is that he wants open carry in Pennsylvania, and he wants it to become a Second Amendment sanctuary state. And that scares me, because I can't imagine walking into Wegmans and there's people with ARs strapped to them. To me, that's living in fear. And that's the exact thing I don't want for my kids in school. I don't want them living in fear. So, like, I don't want to live in fear either. So that's kind of where I'm at with this.
Yeah.
Like, I was watching, there was a political town hall with Beto O'Rourke down in Texas, and it was about abortion. And there's 2 or 3 guys who come in with ARs strapped on them, and they're just standing there. And like, why? Why are you, like, they could murder everybody in that room if they wanted to. And that's just, it's terrorizing. You're terrorizing people, in my opinion. So that's kind of that terror that we feel when we think about that, or we're in those spaces, is not what I want to send my kids to school with every day. So that's why I made the choice that I made. Am I under preparing them and it'll come back to haunt me? I don't know. Like, that's every mother's dilemma, right? Am I doing the right thing? But I just know what I want for them is, the antithesis to what I'm seeing happen in those spaces with open carry.
Yeah. Now, and I'll say it because I am ignorant. I'll admit that I'm ignorant. So open carry means that you can actually be in a public place and have your gun exposed, right? Is that?
Yeah. So normally, like, you have concealed carry and open carry, and you have to have a special permit for that. And sometimes you'll see, like, your average person in Garrity's, and they have like a little concealed revolver or something, and they have a special permit that they've gotten for that. But the further and further, on the other side, and I'm not talking about your general run-of-the-mill Republicans and Democrats. I'm talking about the extremes of that. They want no permit, open carry. Anybody could just walk down the street with a gun, a big gun, a little gun, whatever. That's disturbing to me.
Yeah, that's, and honestly, yeah, I knew that Mastriano, is there, or Mastriani? I
I
forget how
think
you
it's
say his name.
Mastriano.
Mastriano. Yeah, I knew that he's on the extreme side, but you're enlightening me, because now I am scared, because no, to your point, I don't want to be picking up sushi at Wegmans and being next to someone with an AR-15. I mean, that would scare the crap out of me, actually. And that's not the world that I want to live in.
No,
So
and to come
it's
back
frightening.
to being a police officer, how do you know who are the good guys and who are the bad guys when you walk into a situation like that? You can't, there's nothing about me that says good guy with the gun as opposed to bad guy with the gun. Do they
Yeah.
think people dress up in like the black and white burglar stripes when they're bad guys? Like, I don't know how you identify that.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's just a situation that I would not want to live in. And that's why I'm kind of scared of that outcome.
Mm, yeah, me too. Um, and I would like to believe, and again, I'll admit I am ignorant when it comes to these things, just because, well, let's say he were to be elected, there are things that would need to change in order for that to happen.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So we can hope that that won't happen, because at least I hope that it doesn't happen. Yeah, that's a scary idea.
Well, and I think there's always kind of been radical ideas in politics, but there's always been enough of the hive mind of rational people to stop things. I see that hive mind of rationality kind of dwindling, and that's what scares me.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I would agree with that. Things are getting rational seems to be dissipating.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's really scary.
Yeah. Well, let's leave on a hopeful note. And
Mhm.
again, to build on your point, I like what you said, Amy. You know, you see it with your daughters, and I do agree with you. The younger generation is much more inclusive, and
They're
so
amazing.
hopefully that will go far as not having or reducing or totally eliminating in the future school shootings. That would be great. I mean, I don't think we can ever envision the land of like Skittles, where there's
Yeah.
unicorns and like because and that's not realistic, right? I mean, there's always going to be opposition and everything, but I do believe like they are much more inclusive and a much more they want good for the world and for themselves.
Yeah.
So I think that will matter. So let's hope it matters sooner rather than later, but it will matter. Yeah.
Let's hope. I think
Yeah.
so.
So any other as before we wrap up, I want to thank you so much. This is such an important topic and I appreciate your input. And again, obviously neither one of us, I'd like to say none of us we're not trying to say this is how you should do things or whatever.
Sure.
Amy's an advocate. Amy's done research. She's much more familiar with the topic than me. And I appreciate you sharing your input, what you've seen, how you feel about this. Any other closing words or anything that you did want to say that you just didn't have the opportunity to say?
Yeah, I did want to say that there are a lot of good groups out there doing things that will make a difference in your life. Like there's groups out there who dedicate their time and energy and money to providing safe storage kits for guns. Asking ways, helping you as a parent navigate the world of asking your kids' friends' parents, do you have a gun in the house? Is it safely stored? Stuff like that. So there are groups that do things that aren't necessarily like, let's all take the guns and burn them in the middle of the street. Like there's other groups doing things. So for example, No Notoriety is a good group out there that's like focusing on how media covers these stories and not using the shooter's name and stripping them of the notoriety that they sometimes seek in these acts. So things like that. So if you're not somebody who's like, oh, we need to get rid of all the guns, or oh, we need a ton of guns, if you're somewhere kind of in the middle and just looking for ways to make incremental change, those groups are a good way to start.
Yeah. And I love what you mentioned there about the notoriety, because I do think that is a dangerous thing. It's like, and I mentioned before, I yell at the TV. I do yell at the news,
Yeah.
because it's like saying their name, showing their picture. It's
Mhm.
like, and some of them are outright saying they want to be famous, and
Yes.
let's not give that to them. And let's not make that some kind of carrot that dangles out there. It's sick, but we don't want to give them that incentive.
Yeah, I advise anyone, if you're talking about school shootings or writing about them, call them the shooter. That's it. Don't use their names. I mean, I use Dylan and Eric just because I grew up with Columbine, and that was a good instance of the media projecting those two gentlemen to notoriety. And I'm proud to say that I don't really know the names of the other shooters that have kind of come recently, and that's okay. I don't want to know them.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. When you say, I even think I remember the last names of the Columbine shooters, because, I was born in 71. That was a really,
Yep.
a key shooting, an event that I remember being, frightened by, but learned about, and I
Yeah.
do remember their names, but you're right. And I have to say, sadly, that there are often these days, it feels like so many
Yeah.
shootings that I find myself saying, and I feel horrible that that's where it's at. It's like, oh, wait, was that the other shooting? Oh,
Hmm.
wait, we have another one. Like, cause I'll see
Yeah.
like tweets all of a sudden and I'll go, did something just happen? Like what? And then I'll Google and just see, oh, another shooting, which is really sad that that's where we're at right
We're
now.
starting to become multi-generational too. In the book, there's a mother who was in a shooting and her son was in a shooting.
Oh my
Same
gosh.
state, 30 years apart, whatever. So that's happening now.
Wow. That's,
Yep.
that's pain that shouldn't happen. That's
Exactly.
terrible. Well, again, I want to thank you so much, Amy. I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners, even if you don't necessarily agree with everything that you heard or said, we need to have conversations like this. So maybe we gave you an idea, explore something, learn something different, check out some of the resources, check out the book. And again, I want to mention the name of the book. Could you say that again, Amy,
Yeah,
before
the
I look
book
at?
is called If I Don't Make It, I Love You: Survivors in the Aftermath of School Shootings. We got the idea from a text message that one of the children from Parkland sent to their mother. So it's If I Don't Make It, I Love You, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever, anywhere
Okay.
books are sold.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Excuse me, I'm joking now. Thank you so much. I do appreciate your time. And again, this has been a heavy topic. I know I wasn't going to laugh, but we had some opportunities, not obviously talking about shootings, but other things in life because, we had other parts of conversation where we had a little bit of lightness, but we know this is not a light topic. It's a heavy topic. So thank you for listening. And I appreciate you, as I always say, from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wine glass, and stay safe out there.